The Louvre, Paris, a sanctuary of art, a fortress of culture, a place where history breathes on canvas and stone. In 1911, it was considered impenetrable, a museum where masterpieces were guarded by walls, tradition, and an aura of untouchability. Yet, on an ordinary Monday morning in August, the seemingly impossible occurred. A gap on the wall, a missing frame, a void where one of the world's most recognizable smiles once rested. The silence of the empty space was deafening, the realization slow, chilling, and then a city-wide, hysterical panic. How could a painting, not just any painting, but Leonardo da Vinci's Mona Lisa, vanish without a trace from the heart of the art world? The question hung heavy in the Parisian air, a scandalous, unbelievable whisper that quickly became a global headline. This wasn't a smash and grab. This was an audacious, almost impossible disappearing act that humiliated a nation and captivated the world. The light filtering into the Salon Carré on that fateful morning was pale and ordinary, yet it illuminated a scene that was anything but. The space was marked by an absence, a jarring rectangular void on the wall where the Mona Lisa, or La Gioconda, had hung for 7 years. It was an art dealer named Antoine who first noticed the anomaly, though he initially dismissed it as a momentary inconvenience, assuming the masterpiece had simply been taken down for a photograph or some temporary preservation work, a common enough occurrence in the sprawling, sometimes chaotic institution. The sheer audacity of a theft was so far beyond the scope of imagination that for a crucial initial hour, the absence was simply a logistical error, a clerical oversight, a momentary hiccup in the otherwise majestic display of world art. This early misjudgment allowed a vital window of time to close, an initial calm before the storm of realization erupted. Antoine's growing unease finally compelled him to seek out a guard, a man named Poupardin, whose reaction was equally steeped in disbelief and routine. Poupardin checked his records, consulted his colleagues, and only after a series of increasingly frantic and fruitless inquiries did the cold, sickening truth begin to dawn on him. The painting was truly gone. It hadn't been moved. It had been stolen. The initial response was characteristic of the era, a mixture of bewildered inaction and bureaucratic shuffling. No alarms blared. There was no immediate lockdown. Instead, a quiet, almost secret search began within the museum's labyrinthine passages, a pathetic, desperate hope that the thief was an amateur who had merely hidden the massive wooden panel somewhere within the walls. The theft was particularly shocking because of the Louvre's supposedly strict security, though in hindsight, this security was riddled with shocking negligence. Guards were old, poorly paid, and often slept on the job. The sheer size of the museum meant that vast sections were unsupervised for hours. Furthermore, the museum operated on a bizarre schedule, closing only on Mondays, but crucially allowing workers and contractors access even during these closed hours. This relaxed, almost archaic atmosphere provided the perfect cover for a meticulous, non-violent infiltration. The thief didn't need to be an international master criminal. He only needed a simple understanding of the museum's routine and an enormous amount of nerve to exploit the museum's fundamental vulnerabilities. When the news finally reached the museum director's office, the atmosphere was one of immediate, overwhelming panic and a desperate need for secrecy, which ironically fueled the scandal later on. Their first impulse was to contain the information, to quietly recover the painting before the public knew, fearing the massive national embarrassment and international outrage that would follow. They initiated an internal manhunt, sealing the gates not to prevent an escape, but to desperately comb through every corner and corridor, including the staff lockers and basement storage rooms. This delay was critical, allowing the thief precious hours to be far away, melting into the chaos of the Parisian cityscape with the most famous painting in the world tucked under his arm. The initial investigation, led by an unenthusiastic local police force, focused on the most improbable suspects. Wild theories emerged immediately. Disgruntled museum staff, anarchists attempting to protest the bourgeois ownership of art, or even a mad artist trying to prove a point. The police found only meager clues. The painting's protective glass case and its heavy oak frame, abandoned in a small service staircase, confirming that the thief had taken only the wooden panel itself. This single fact suggested the crime was committed by someone with a degree of physical strength and a premeditated plan to make the unwieldy artwork more portable, a subtle detail that immediately ruled out many of the more fanciful, high society theories. The realization that the theft was complete and irreversible led to a national crisis. The Louvre was abruptly shut down for an entire week, a gesture of national mourning and humiliation. Crowds gathered outside the museum, not in protest, but in stunned disbelief and a strange collective grief. They laid flowers at the empty spot on the wall. For days, the wall where the Mona Lisa had hung became a perverse magnetic tourist attraction. The image of the empty space, reproduced in newspapers worldwide, became the ultimate symbol of the audacious crime, turning a priceless piece of art into a tragically successful ghost story, and setting the stage for one of the most baffling, and eventually most surprising, criminal investigations in history. The global reaction was immediate and immense, transforming the mundane police investigation into an international obsession. Newspapers worldwide ran daily updates, often featuring sensationalized and entirely baseless theories. The French government, desperate to salvage its reputation, mobilized its resources, sealing the borders and scrutinizing all major ports and railway stations, operating under the naive assumption that the thief would attempt a brazen and immediate escape from the country. Every known art dealer and collector became a suspect, and every piece of mail leaving France was eyed with suspicion, a massive, costly operation based on pure speculation rather than concrete evidence. Highlighting the chaotic nature of the early stages of the manhunt, the police, facing intense public pressure, grasped at any straw. They circulated millions of flyers with the painting's image, a move that ironically made the Mona Lisa more famous than ever before, and offered a substantial reward, hoping to tempt the thief or an accomplice. The problem was that the painting's fame was simultaneously its curse. It was far too recognizable to be sold on the open market, meaning the motive was likely not simple profit, but something far more personal or ideological. This conundrum baffled investigators, leading them to pursue dead ends involving eccentric millionaires and even Prussian spies looking to humiliate France. One of the earliest and most sensational breakthroughs turned out to be a massive red herring. The police received a tip about a struggling poet and art critic named Guillaume Apollinaire, who had previously called for the Louvre to be burned down. His apartment was raided, and he was implicated by a friend, the young, ambitious artist Pablo Picasso. It was revealed that Picasso had purchased 2 stolen Iberian statuettes from a former Louvre employee, but both men vehemently denied any involvement in the Mona Lisa theft. The spectacle of 2 of modern art's biggest names being questioned by police created a media frenzy, diverting crucial resources and attention away from the actual trail of the thief. The interrogation of Apollinaire and Picasso was a humiliating disaster for the police. They were questioned separately, both denying knowledge of the Mona Lisa but admitting to owning stolen goods, a common practice in the bohemian Parisian art scene of the time. The sensational headlines about the arrests eventually gave way to a grudging realization that these were merely distractions. The authorities were forced to release the 2 artists, but the public relations damage was done, showcasing the incompetence of the police force and reinforcing the idea that the theft was unsolvable, a perfect crime committed by an unseen genius. Despite the high-profile drama, the key evidence was right under the police's nose, the abandoned frame and glass case. Fingerprint analysis was still a relatively new and underappreciated forensic technique at the time, and though multiple prints were lifted from the scene, they were initially dismissed or misfiled. The police were focused on grand theories of international conspiracies, neglecting the meticulous, tedious work of linking a simple fingerprint to a known criminal or even a former employee. This oversight would prove to be the most critical error, allowing the thief to slip away while investigators pursued shadows and celebrities in the high society world of Parisian art. As days turned into weeks, the initial hysteria slowly faded into a state of resigned melancholy. The French government, having failed to produce any leads, was ridiculed internationally. The empty wall in the Salon Carré remained, temporarily filled with a portrait by Raphael, but visitors flocked to see the absence, the ghost of the Mona Lisa, turning the spot into a strange altar to its memory. The public began to accept that the painting was gone forever, likely destroyed or hidden in some private vault, a tragedy that forever tainted the reputation of the Louvre and the entire nation, cementing the Mona Lisa's disappearance as the greatest art heist of the century. The man at the center of the storm was not a super spy or a master thief, but a simple, unassuming Italian handyman named Vincenzo Perugia. He had worked at the Louvre previously, installing the protective glass cases for several major works, including the Mona Lisa. This employment gave him intimate knowledge of the museum's layout, its blind spots, its service corridors, and, most importantly, the exact location of the security weak points. Perugia was quiet, methodical, and invisible, the ultimate gray man who could walk through a crowd of guards without registering in their memories, a distinct advantage over any flashy, professional criminal. Perugia's plan was shockingly simple and relied entirely on the museum's negligence. He chose a Monday, the museum's closure day, knowing that only a skeleton crew of guards and a handful of workers would be present. The night before, he had smuggled himself into a small, unused storage closet near the Salon Carré, where he patiently waited for the doors to be locked and the vast, echoing halls of the Louvre to fall silent. It was a terrifying vigil, sleeping on a dusty floor, relying solely on his nerve and the assumption that no guard would bother to check that particular forgotten corner of the sprawling building. His primary motivation was not financial, at least not initially, but a fervent, misplaced sense of Italian patriotism. Perugia genuinely believed that the Mona Lisa, a masterpiece by Leonardo da Vinci, an Italian, had been stolen by Napoleon and rightfully belonged back in Italy, an historical inaccuracy as da Vinci himself had brought the painting to France. This emotional nationalistic drive gave him the cold determination necessary to pull off the unbelievable. He saw himself not as a criminal, but as a cultural liberator, correcting a historical wrong in a grand, albeit delusional gesture. At dawn, dressed in the white smock of a museum worker, Perugia emerged from his hiding spot, blending seamlessly with the few other laborers entering the museum at that hour. He walked directly to the Salon Carré, where he found the wall, momentarily unsupervised, a testament to the lax security protocols he had memorized. Using simple tools, a small knife to unscrew 4 bolts and a screwdriver to loosen the hooks, he quickly and efficiently removed the painting from the wall, the heavy panel momentarily resting in his hands, the climax of his patient, year-long planning. The painting was heavy and cumbersome. Perugia immediately took it to a nearby, rarely used service staircase where he performed the critical, labor-intensive step, separating the famous wooden panel from its heavy protective frame and glass casing. This was a noisy, physically demanding task that should have alerted any nearby guard, yet the noise was absorbed by the thick stone walls and the general clatter of the museum's morning routine. He left the detritus behind, an immediate clue that the police later overlooked, and carefully wrapped the bare panel in a blanket before tucking it under his work smock. The most nerve-wracking moment came during his attempt to leave the building. He discovered a locked outer service door, the exit he had planned on using. For a terrifying minute, he was trapped. It was only by a stroke of luck, the arrival of a passing plumber, whom Perugia calmly asked for help, that the lock was opened. The plumber, noticing the man's work clothes and calm demeanor, unsuspectingly let the thief carrying the world's most valuable painting walk right out of the Louvre, down the street, and into the anonymity of the Parisian morning, a stunning, almost farcical culmination of the entire perfect crime. For the next 2 years, the Mona Lisa vanished into the mundane world of a small, cramped Parisian apartment. Perugia lived at 7 Rue des Petits Champs, a typical, unremarkable residence just a few blocks from the museum he had robbed. He hid the masterpiece in a simple wooden trunk with a false bottom, typically covered with old rags, shoes, and junk. It was an astonishingly audacious hiding place, relying on the fact that the police would be looking for the painting in high-security vaults, not a working-class lodging house, further emphasizing the thief's counterintuitive genius. Life became a carefully constructed facade for Perugia. He continued to work as a painter and decorator, leading a quiet, frugal existence, never flaunting any sudden wealth that might draw suspicion. He lived in constant, paralyzing fear of being discovered. Every knock on the door, every unexpected sound sent a jolt of terror through him, knowing the price of his secret was a lifetime in prison. He would occasionally open the trunk in the dark to gaze upon the priceless artifact, a private ritual that reinforced his mission and kept his nerves steady through the long, silent months of waiting. The police, meanwhile, searched thousands of homes and questioned countless individuals, but Perugia was never seriously considered. When they briefly questioned him, his calm, unassuming answers and his known, steady employment history quickly moved him down the list of suspects. His alibi, that he was working elsewhere on the day of the theft, was easily verifiable. And the police failed to recognize the man they had questioned was the same individual whose fingerprints they had carelessly filed away. Another stunning failure of early forensic investigation. The challenge for Perugia was figuring out what to do next. He couldn't sell the painting, it was too hot, and keeping it indefinitely was a constant, exhausting risk. He refused to contact any known criminal organizations, fearing they would simply seize the painting. His initial patriotic fervor slowly mutated into a frustrated obsession. He had the painting, but it was a useless trophy, a beautiful prisoner that trapped him just as much as he trapped it. Unable to complete his self-proclaimed mission of repatriating the art, the legend of the Mona Lisa grew exponentially during its absence. Replicas sold like hotcakes, songs were written about her, and her image adorned everything from postcards to cigarette packets. The world mourned her loss, believing she was truly gone forever, perhaps lost to a fire or sold to a reclusive, unknown billionaire. This global fame ironically provided Perugia with the 2 years of cover he needed. As the police and public focused on the vast scale of the mystery, neglecting the possibility that the thief was just a lonely man living a few streets away from the scene of the crime. The waiting game came to an end in late 1913. Perugia, running low on money and desperate to resolve his self-imposed cultural mission, decided the time was right to make his move. He knew he had to get the painting to Italy. He prepared a small suitcase, carefully padded and lined, ready to conceal the wooden panel, and quietly boarded a train, embarking on the most dangerous leg of his journey, the return to his homeland, carrying the world's most desired and valuable contraband, hoping to find a buyer who would recognize his patriotic intentions. Perugia traveled to Florence, Italy, a city rich with Renaissance history and Italian art pride. He used the alias Leonardo Vincenzo and checked into a modest hotel. His plan was to offer the painting to a respected Florentine art dealer, Alfredo. Geri, under the pretense of returning a national treasure, Perugia sent a cautious, coded letter to Geri, claiming to possess the Gioconda and demanding a ransom of 500,000 lire, not for personal profit, he claimed, but as a reimbursement for his expenses and to cover the fees for his patriotic retrieval. Alfredo Geri, a cautious and shrewd dealer, was instantly skeptical. After 2 years of hoaxes and false leads, the claim seemed unbelievable, but the letter's details about the painting were too specific to ignore. Geri immediately contacted Giovanni Poggi, the director of the Uffizi Gallery, a man who would instantly recognize the genuine article. They agreed to meet the supposed restorer, setting a trap in motion that was meticulously planned to avoid spooking the thief while ensuring the painting's safety. The meeting took place in Perugia's hotel room. Perugia, with a theatrical flourish, opened the wooden trunk and revealed the panel. The moment Geri and Poggi saw the famous, slightly yellowed varnish and the characteristic fine cracks of the cypress wood panel, their skepticism dissolved into stunned, reverent confirmation. It was undoubtedly the Mona Lisa. The two men maintained their composure, pretending to negotiate the payment and praising Perugia's patriotic act to keep him calm and compliant. Poggi, feigning a need to verify the authenticity of the artwork with experts, convinced Perugia to allow him to take the painting away for the night. Perugia, blinded by his pride and belief in his own patriotic righteousness, agreed, convinced. His mission was finally reaching its triumphant conclusion. As soon as the painting was safely in the possession of the Uffizi staff, Geri and Poggi contacted the police, sending the telegram that instantly ended the 2-year global mystery. The Mona Lisa is found. The police moved swiftly. Perugia, still waiting patiently in his hotel room for his supposed $500,000 lire payout, was easily apprehended the next morning. He offered no resistance, seeming genuinely shocked and confused at his arrest, unable to grasp that his patriotic act was universally viewed as a grand theft. He immediately confessed, detailing the entire plan from hiding in the closet to walking out the door with the painting, a testament to the simplicity and audacity of his crime. The discovery created an immediate and even greater sensation than the theft itself. The international press descended upon Florence. The initial shock quickly turned to relief, followed by an intense curiosity about the unassuming man who had held the world's most valuable painting in his tiny apartment for 2 years. The Mona Lisa was an international phenomenon again, not because of its disappearance, but because of its miraculous, quiet reappearance, ready for a grand, triumphant return to Paris. Before being returned to France, the Mona Lisa became a temporary Italian national hero. The painting was placed on display at the Uffizi Gallery in Florence, and later at the Borghese Gallery in Rome. The Italian government, recognizing the powerful cultural moment, organized this brief celebratory tour, which drew unprecedented crowds of Italians who felt a sudden fierce connection to the masterpiece, seeing it as temporarily theirs following its retrieval by a fellow countryman. The lines to see the painting stretched for miles, turning the viewing into a genuine cultural phenomenon. For the first time, millions of ordinary people, many of whom had never seen the Mona Lisa in person, connected with the artwork. The theft and recovery had stripped the painting of its staid institutional aura, imbuing it with a new, thrilling narrative of adventure, suspense, and national pride, fundamentally changing its status from a famous work of art to a living legend. The exhibition served a dual purpose. It allowed the public to celebrate the painting's recovery, and it served as a diplomatic gesture. The Italian government was keen to show France that while one of their citizens had stolen the painting, it was another Italian who had ensured its safe return, meticulously protected during its 2 years in hiding. This carefully orchestrated public viewing helped soothe the tension and embarrassment that the theft had caused between the two nations. In Paris, the reaction was a mixture of stunned relief and deep embarrassment. The French realized that had it not been for the integrity of the Italian art dealer Gary, the painting might have vanished again. The focus immediately shifted to fixing the Louvre's shattered reputation, with promises of completely revamped security systems, new guard training, and a complete modernization of the museum's archaic protocols, the cost of the reform being infinitely preferable to the cost of the theft. The 2-week Italian tour was a resounding success, culminating in a solemn and emotional handover ceremony. The Mona Lisa, carefully packed and guarded, was escorted back to the French border by high-ranking officials from both nations, a diplomatic procession that underscored the artwork's value as an international symbol. The painting that had been smuggled out in a rag-covered box was now returning in a fortified official carriage, a dramatic reversal of fortune for the famed canvas. The entire episode, from the empty space on the wall to the triumphant return, had transformed the Mona Lisa forever. It was no longer just a beautiful portrait. It was a symbol of vulnerability, endurance, and international cooperation. The theft had inadvertently turned the painting into the single most famous piece of art in the world, its value now derived, not just from Da Vinci's genius, but from the astonishing dramatic narrative of its 2-year disappearance and the quiet, almost absurd circumstances of its recovery. Vincenzo Perugia's trial took place in Italy in 1914, and it was less a criminal proceeding and more a national spectacle. The courtroom was packed, and public opinion was sharply divided. Many Italians viewed him as a genuine national hero, a simple patriot who had corrected a historical wrong, even though his history was factually incorrect. The defense attorney leaned heavily on this patriotic motivation, arguing that Perugia was mentally unstable, suffering from an obsession rather than exhibiting the cold malice of a common thief, hoping to elicit sympathy from the jury. The prosecution, while forced to acknowledge the patriotic angle, stressed the severity of the theft and the 2 years of global panic and expense it had caused. They meticulously detailed the breaking and entering, the planned deception, and the ransom demand, arguing that regardless of the motive, the act was a deliberate, calculated crime. They also presented evidence of Perugia's past petty thefts from the Louvre, suggesting a pattern of opportunism rather than just pure nationalistic zeal. Perugia's testimony was rambling and sincere, maintaining his conviction that he was merely returning a spoil of Napoleon's war machine. He described the moment of the theft with surprising clarity, detailing how he had simply waited for the right moment and walked out the door, highlighting the astonishing laxity of the Louvre's security. This revelation was a further embarrassment to the French authorities, who had to listen to the thief himself explain exactly how easy it had been to take their greatest treasure. The jury, swayed by the defense's emotional appeal and the widespread public sentiment that celebrated the Mona Lisa's temporary Italian homecoming, delivered a remarkably lenient verdict. Perugia was convicted, But due to the perceived patriotic intent and the fact that the painting was recovered undamaged, he was given a sentence of only 1 year and 15 days. This light sentence stunned observers, confirming that the court saw him as a misguided nationalist rather than a hardened international criminal. Due to time served and good behavior, Perugia was released shortly after the trial and quietly returned to his normal life, eventually serving in the Italian army during World War I and later moving back to France, where he ironically ran a small paint shop. He was never able to profit from the crime or his brief fame, fading back into obscurity as quickly as he had emerged, a testament to the fact that the greatest art theft in history was committed by an amateur whose only reward was a brief, confused moment of fame. The trial's focus on the motive, rather than the act, ensured that the true lessons of the theft were partially obscured. The Louvre's systemic failures, the lack of guard training, the poor use of forensics, and the administrative chaos were overshadowed by the romanticized story of the patriotic thief. Nonetheless, the trial officially closed the case, giving the world a definitive, if strange, explanation for the 2-year disappearance, forever linking the subtle smile of the Mona Lisa with the simple, passionate, and misguided face of Vincenzo Perugia. In January 1914, after its grand Italian tour and safe return to French soil, the Mona Lisa was finally brought back to the Louvre. The reinstallation was not a quiet affair, but a major media event, attended by government officials, museum staff, and an army of journalists who had tracked the story for 2 years. The moment the crate was opened and the iconic panel was revealed was captured for posterity, symbolizing the restoration of national pride and the end of a long, humiliating chapter for the French establishment. The painting was not hung in the same spot immediately. Instead, a solemn and elaborate ceremony was held. The artwork was thoroughly examined by experts, who confirmed it was completely undamaged, a small miracle considering its rough handling. The focus was on ensuring its permanent safety. New advanced security measures, including a completely new steel frame, hidden chains, and a state-of-the-art alarm system for the time, were implemented, turning the Mona Lisa's display area into a miniature fortress. When the Louvre reopened to the public, the crowds were unlike anything the museum had ever witnessed. People flocked to the Salon Carré, not just to admire the art, but to witness a living legend that had been lost and found. The queues stretched around the block, and the painting was the main attraction. The experience of seeing her had changed. The viewers were now part of the history, the drama of the theft adding a layer of thrilling context that amplified the painting's aura far beyond its artistic merit. The Louvre itself had undergone a significant and necessary transformation. The scandal had forced a radical overhaul of its staff and procedures. The old, sleepy guards were replaced by younger, more alert staff. Fingerprinting became a routine security measure, and an inventory system was finally implemented to properly track the hundreds of thousands of objects in the collection. In an ironic twist, the theft, which had exposed the museum's profound failings, ultimately led to its modernization. The painting's reinstallation cemented its status as an unparalleled international celebrity. Before the theft, it was famous among art critics and scholars. After the theft, it was a household name across the globe. The story of its disappearance became the narrative through which millions of people were introduced to the painting. The subtle, enigmatic smile was now viewed through the lens of a heist, a hiding, and a return, its mystery deepened by the real-life adventure it had just endured. The empty space on the wall was filled, but the memory of the 2-year void lingered. The Mona Lisa was not just back, it was changed. It was now a global commodity, a pilgrimage site, an object of fascination that transcended art history. The little Italian handyman, Vincenzo Perugia, had, through his crime, unintentionally created the world's first truly global art superstar, permanently altering the relationship between the public and one of the world's most enduring masterpieces. The legacy of the Mona Lisa theft is multifaceted, permanently impacting museum security and art celebrity. The fact that the most famous artwork in the world could be stolen so easily became a chilling lesson for institutions everywhere, forcing museums to move away from relying on historical reputation and into implementing professional modern security protocols. The heist essentially ushered in the era of high-tech museum security, making the theft a catalyst for an entire industry focused on protecting cultural heritage from both amateur and professional thieves. Vincenzo Perugia's story continued to be told and retold, often with a romanticized slant that obscured the actual crime. He died in 1925 in France, having achieved neither wealth nor lasting fame. But his name remains forever linked to the Mona Lisa. The sheer absurdity of his motive, a misguided, simple patriotism, has always added a unique layer to the story, contrasting sharply with the expected motives of greed or professional criminality that usually drive art theft. The theft ironically solved the problem of the Mona Lisa's identity crisis. For years, there were debates among scholars about its provenance and sitter. The global coverage and frantic search settled its value and importance in the public imagination forever, turning it into the undeniable, undisputed centerpiece of the Louvre. The artwork became a cultural touchstone that could be referenced across borders and languages, thanks almost entirely to the 2 years it spent wrapped in a blanket in a janitor's trunk. The most compelling, and often debated, theory that emerged after the fact involved a much more professional operation. Some later experts suggested that Perugia was merely a low-level accomplice in a much grander scheme, possibly a plot to sell forged copies of the Mona Lisa to wealthy American collectors, with the real painting having to disappear for the fakes to gain credibility. In this theory, Perugia was the fall guy, meant to confess and provide a simple, patriotic narrative that would close the case quickly. However, no definitive proof of this mastermind theory ever surfaced, and the official record remains Perugia's lone act of misguided patriotism. The fact that the initial police investigation missed so many clues, the fingerprints, the background of the former employee, allowed the simple narrative to take hold. Ultimately, the story of the lone, lovesick patriot was easier for the public to digest than a complex, cynical international art fraud, and it remains the accepted, if imperfect, truth. Today, the Mona Lisa is arguably the most famous painting in the world, viewed by millions annually, protected by layers of bulletproof glass and sophisticated surveillance. Yet every person who stands before her remembers the story of the empty wall and the simple, invisible man who dared to challenge the entire art establishment. The theft ensured that the Mona Lisa is a masterpiece of both art and crime history, her faint, knowing smile forever a symbol of the perfect, yet completely illogical heist. The Mona Lisa now sits in her permanent, climate-controlled enclosure, perhaps the most carefully guarded painting in the world, the result of lessons learned from a handyman's audacity. She is housed in the salle d'état, protected by layers of bulletproof glass and constant, unseen surveillance that utilizes technology far beyond anything Vincenzo Perugia could have imagined. Yet despite all the modern precautions, the fundamental mystery remains. How did a single, non-violent, minimally skilled individual bypass the entire system to steal the world's greatest treasure? And why did he keep it for so long without selling it? Visitors today often remark on the painting's size. It's much smaller than they expect, and the subtle yet powerful enigma of her smile. But that smile, already famous for its ambiguity, took on a new layer of meaning after the heist. It became a symbol of art's vulnerability and its resilience. When people look at the Mona Lisa now, they aren't just contemplating the skill of Da Vinci. They are looking at a survivor, a canvas that spent 2 years under a pile of rags, yet emerged to claim global domination. The empty wall of August 1911 casts a psychological shadow that is impossible to erase. It represents the moment when the world realized that cultural treasures were not invulnerable, and that institutions built on centuries of tradition could be undone by the simplest of schemes. The theft exposed the hubris of the European cultural elite, forcing them to understand that true security required vigilance and innovation, not just reputation and old stone walls. That single act of crime forced a seismic shift in global heritage protection. The lasting impact is perhaps greatest on the concept of art celebrity. The Mona Lisa became the first artwork to be treated like a celebrity figure. Missing person posters, front-page headlines, global mourning. This transformation ensured that the painting's value today is not just measured in pigment and technique, but in its unparalleled narrative weight. The theft is now an inseparable part of its identity, a thrilling, dark chapter that only adds to the mystique of the world's most desired woman. Even the smallest details of the theft have been absorbed into the mythology. The fact that her frame and glass were found in a service staircase reminds us that high art is protected not by magic, but by mundane mechanics, screws, bolts, and the diligence of guards. Every time security is checked, every time the glass is polished, the ghost of Perugia, the humble handyman, lingers in the halls of the Louvre, a reminder that the simplest plan, executed with unwavering nerve, can topple the greatest fortress. The case is closed, the thief confessed, and the painting is safe. Yet the story's power lies in the uncomfortable truth that a major piece of the puzzle, the deeper motives, the potential collaborators, the reason for the 2-year silence, remains tantalizingly vague. The Mona Lisa continues to smile, an enigmatic witness to her own disappearance and return. She holds the secret of the perfect crime, and for over a century, she hasn't revealed a single clue, her silence ensuring that the mystery endures. 2 years. 2 years the world held its breath, mourning a smile it thought was lost forever. This was more than a theft. It was a cultural kidnapping that stripped a masterpiece of its pedestal and sent it on a lonely journey, hidden from the eyes of the world it was created to captivate. Think of the audacity of that simple man, walking through the heart of Paris with 5 centuries of genius tucked under his arm. Think of the silence in that tiny apartment, broken only by the whispers of a masterpiece, waiting for its cue to re-enter the spotlight. The story of the Mona Lisa is a testament to the fact that great art endures, that human passion, even if misguided, can drive the most impossible acts, and that sometimes the most sophisticated crimes are solved by the simplest twist of fate. But the final irony is this: Vincenzo Perugia stole the painting hoping to make it less French, less famous, less global. Instead, he made her the most famous painting on earth. Her absence taught us her true worth, and her return defined her legend. We now look at her not just as art, but as history, a beautiful survivor of a dizzying adventure. The smile is no longer just a painter's trick. It's the defiant grin of a masterpiece that refused to be forgotten. We have countless other mysteries for you to uncover.